He boarded the plane like anyone else, quiet, dignified, prepared to rest before another high-stakes day. He wasn't wearing a badge, no media crew, no red carpet, just a calm presence in a tailored coat and a confirmed first-class ticket. But 5 minutes later, he was gone, removed from his seat, silently displaced, and the man who replaced her, a former senator with no paperwork, just privilege. But here's what no one on that flight knew. The man they moved wasn't just another passenger. He owned part of the airline. He was the CEO, and he wasn't going to stay quiet. What happens when the system assumes you don't belong? What power lies in choosing not to yell, but to lead? And how does one silent moment spark a national reckoning? This is more than a story about race, class, or one airline's failure. This is about a man who turned humiliation into transformation without ever raising his voice. If you believe dignity matters, if you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or overlooked, then stay with us. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful stories that speak truth. Now, let's begin. The hum of the engines was almost meditative. At 36,000 feet above Kansas, the cabin lights of Flight ELA 2655 glowed a soft amber. Somewhere over the horizon, twilight kissed the clouds. In seat 1A of first class, Avery Sinclair sat in stillness, his legs crossed neatly, a hardbound notebook balanced across his lap. He wasn't scrolling on his phone like the others. No earbuds in, no glass of wine, just the steady scratch of his pen against paper. He was reviewing notes, ideas, margins, human behavior patterns. Her leather journal had no logo, but the fountain pen resting between his fingers whispered wealth, discreet wealth, the kind that didn't announce itself with logos or noise. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, collecting drink glasses and gently waking dozing passengers for meal service. Avery looked up momentarily, catching his reflection in the cabin window. The soft light framed his face, warm brown skin, strong cheekbones, a slight furrow in his brow that came naturally when he was focused. Her tailored cream blazer hugged his shoulders, buttoned modestly over a white dress shirt. Every detail of his outfit whispered intentionality. The seat beside his was empty. It had been booked last minute by someone with executive override status, according to the whispering among the staff earlier. He hadn't minded. Solitude was often his favorite traveling companion. Until now, a young flight attendant approached from the galley, blonde hair tied neatly into a regulation bun, crisp smile, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read E. Rowe. "Excuse me, sir," he said with careful professionalism. "I'm going to need you to prepare to move to a seat in main cabin." Avery blinked, not out of confusion, but as if granting the moment a chance to rephrase itself. "I'm sorry," he said, calm and clear. "There's been a change." The attendant continued, not meeting his eyes fully. "This seat's been reallocated to accommodate a priority passenger." Avery closed his notebook slowly. He slid his pen into the journal's spine and looked up, his voice steady. "My boarding pass says 1A, booked 2 weeks ago, full fare." The attendant hesitated, eyes flicking down to the clipboard again. "Yes, I understand that, but the manifest's been updated by request. The guest boarding in a moment has a medical condition that requires this exact seat configuration. He's a longtime VIP client of the airline, and our staff made special arrangements." Avery didn't move. He wasn't being combative. He was simply waiting for logic, or decency, whichever would arrive first. Behind them, the hush of first class began to shift. A few passengers turned their heads. One man in 2D quietly angled his phone to start recording, camera barely above tray table level. Avery gave a quiet breath, measured and full. Then he responded, his voice velvet-lined but unwavering. I'm happy to accommodate medical needs. I'd just like to see the official documentation that justifies my displacement. And the name of your supervisor. The flight attendant stiffened. Her smile faltered ever so slightly. I'm handling this request as directed, he said. The senior flight attendant will be here momentarily. Avery gave a small nod. He understood the game now. It wasn't about rules. It was about perception. He didn't look like he belonged here. He looked out of place to them invisible status, unrecognized by eyes trained to see prestige in a certain mold. He rested his hands on the arms of his seat, still not moving. Moments later, a taller man in a pressed navy vest approached, graying at the temples, clipboard folded under one arm. Marcus Reed, senior crew. The air shifted as he stood before him, voice low but curt. We need you to comply, sir. This is not personal, but Mr. Caldwell is boarding shortly. He's a former senator and a Tier 1 medical priority traveler. He specifically requested seat 1A. Avery turned his gaze to Marcus, letting the silence between them fill with the weight of his presence. And I requested this seat. I paid for it. Weeks ago. Full fare. I understand that, but we're asking for flexibility. Marcus said, we'll reseat you in premium economy with a complimentary voucher. A pause. A quiet tightening in his throat, invisible to the room, but all-consuming in his chest. Avery had spent a lifetime swallowing these moments, polished over, smoothed out, pushed aside. But there was a difference between being graceful and being eroded. Would you ask the same of me? He asked softly. If I were wearing a navy blazer and had salt and pepper hair, Marcus blinked, not responding. Evelyn's posture wavered behind him, unsure now if this was unfolding the way he imagined. Cameras were out now. Not many, but enough. The hum of tension buzzed like static. Avery considered his options. He could escalate, call his assistant, speak a name, drop a title, but that wasn't the lesson he wanted to teach. Instead, he simply nodded. Very well, he said, but I would like your names and your employee numbers, please. Marcus looked taken aback. I'll provide mine, he said flatly. Marcus Reed, crew ID 8843. Evelyn hesitated. Evelyn Rowe, 73928. Avery pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed them in. As he gathered his things, his movements were quiet, deliberate. He didn't slam anything, didn't sigh. He just moved. He paused before stepping into the aisle. Thank you, he said. I look forward to seeing how this gets handled. The man in 2D was still recording. Her eyes wide now, his hand trembling slightly with the weight of witnessing. As Avery stepped toward the economy cabin, he passed other first-class passengers who avoided his eyes. Some whispered. Others watched his with the stunned reverence usually reserved for storms they hadn't expected. None of them knew they had just displaced the executive owner of their airline, but they were about to. The walk to economy felt longer than it should have. Avery Sinclair moved down the narrow aisle with a kind of quiet authority that made silence follow his like a shadow. The first-class curtain hadn't even fallen back into place when whispers began to fill the cabin behind him. One by one, eyes lifted from screens and magazines as passengers took in the unlikely image of a man in tailored silk and Italian leather heading toward row 18. He paused when he reached seat 18C. A college student with large headphones nodded awkwardly and shifted his bag off the middle seat. The man in the window seat, a traveling consultant from the looks of his open spreadsheet, didn't even glance up. Avery settled himself without a word. He didn't need a spectacle. He needed a moment to breathe. He tucked his briefcase carefully under the seat, opened his notebook again, and stared at the ink from earlier. Her handwriting, normally crisp, looked different, tighter, tense. The words blurred for a moment as his mind played back the sound of Marcus Reed's voice. Flexibility. That's what they called it when you had to make yourself smaller so someone else could remain comfortable. He closed his eyes and inhaled. A memory rose. He was 9, sitting in the back seat of his mother's Oldsmobile as they were pulled over in rural Tennessee. Her mother, strong, composed, kept both hands on the wheel. The officer never gave a reason for the stop. He called his mother sweetheart and asked whose car he was driving. Avery didn't forget that. He remembered the silence after they were allowed to drive away. The way his mother's voice cracked only after they'd turned onto their street. It had taken Avery years to name that moment humiliation wrapped in politeness, violence beneath a smile. And now here he was, 3 decades later, still being asked to step aside with a smile. He opened his laptop slowly. The airline's Wi-Fi system blinked to life. He typed in a familiar portal, one not accessible to the public. Avery Sinclair didn't just fly with Alara Air, her private equity firm. Sinclair Equity Group was one of its largest stakeholders, owning 22.4% of the company through layered portfolios and board seat placements. Most of his board had no idea he was flying commercial today. She'd chosen anonymity on purpose. It had been a long week in Chicago talks, mergers, voices competing in expensive rooms, and he wanted to observe his company from the perspective of an everyday traveler. That anonymity had come with a price. He clicked through the internal HR portal. Employee behavior reporting. Crew ID entry 73928. Evelyn Rowe. Crew ID entry 88413 Marcus Reed. He added a short field note. Passenger displacement from confirmed first-class reservation due to unsubstantiated VIP reassignment. Requesting review of passenger treatment protocols and policy adherence. Before he could hit submit, a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me. I saw what happened." Avery turned. It was the college student beside him. He looked about 20, maybe 21. Bright eyes, nervous energy. "I'm sorry. That was really wrong." Avery studied him for a beat. Then he gave a soft smile. "Thank you. What's your name, Tariq?" "Tariq Adams. I'm studying sociology." He paused. I was honestly too scared to say anything when it happened. But I recorded some of it. I don't know if that helps. Avery tilted his head. "You recorded it?" "Yeah, just audio." I had my phone on the tray table, and I hit record when I saw the attendant lean over you. I didn't think it'd go that far. Avery blinked slowly, heart catching slightly. "Would you be willing to share it?" Tariq nodded. "Of course." I emailed it to myself. I can forward it to you. He pulled out a sleek business card, no company name, just his personal contact. "Send it here." He took it, eyebrows raising subtly as he read the name. Wait, you're Avery Sinclair." He gave him a knowing smile. "Yes, but let's keep that between us for now." Tariq's face shifted from recognition to reverence. He knew the name. Anyone watching markets or finance did. He was one of the few black women to ever control a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. Some called his ruthless. Others said he ran his companies like orchestras. No one note out a tune. He looked down at the card again. Wow. He placed a finger gently against his lips. Not yet. Just then. An announcement came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, We'll be lifting off in approximately 5 minutes. Please ensure all devices are in airplane mode and carry-ons are stowed. The cabin settled into a practiced rhythm. Overhead bins clicked shut. Safety videos played. And in 1A, a man with silver hair and entitlement in his posture reclined his seat as if the world owed him stillness. Nathan Caldwell, former senator, now a high-profile consultant for private aerospace defense contracts. Known for calling himself an American traditionalist in interviews, he traveled often, and he traveled big. He had arrived late to the gate, but was ushered through by a senior flight officer. His assistant carried 2 phones and 3 folders. The moment he saw 1A empty, he grunted approval. Good. I can stretch out. That man was moved. Right. Yes, sir, Evelyn whispered. She's been reseated. Good. Allergic to confrontation. I'll need my ginger ale early. And no interruptions. I've got calls. Yes, sir. Back in row 18, Avery heard nothing of this, but he didn't need to. He could feel it. The pattern. The predictable choreography of privilege. The engines began their rumble. Wheels lifted. The cabin tilted into the clouds. Somewhere over the Midwest. Evelyn Rowe checked his tablet. The manifest still displayed Avery's original seat. He scrolled quickly, correcting it, then paused. There it was, an internal note attached to the passenger's record. Red flag icon. High-tier stakeholder. Wait, he whispered. Marcus looked over. What is it? Evelyn's voice lowered to a breath. The man from 1A. She's listed as Tier S. That's not just a frequent flyer. Marcus frowned. Show me. They both leaned closer to the screen. The designation Tier S was only given to shareholders or owners. Their stomachs dropped in unison. Evelyn straightened, heart now racing. We might have just made a very serious mistake. Marcus took a step back. His throat tightened. There had been no pushback, no rudeness, just questions. Calm, measured questions. The kind that meant I don't need to shout. You'll hear me soon enough. He looked toward the curtain separating first class from the rest of the aircraft. Beyond that veil sat a man in silence, watching, waiting, documenting. The plane flew on, but the fall hadn't even begun yet. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Flight ELA 2655 leveled in the sky. Cabin lights dimmed to a warm, dusky hue. Attendants began moving briskly through the aisles, preparing to serve drinks and distribute hot towels to the front. In first class. Evelyn Rowe adjusted his navy vest and ran a hand along his hair to ensure the regulation bun was still tight. But his fingers trembled slightly. He had reread the passenger manifest 3 times. The note attached to the man from seat 1A glowed like a warning light in his mind. Tier S. It wasn't a customer loyalty rank. It wasn't medical. It meant shareholder. High level. Possibly executive. Possibly. Someone who could end careers. He hadn't realized. Not at first. The man had seemed ordinary, at least in terms of first-class passengers. No assistant, no entourage, no luxury jewelry or dramatic presence. Just a calm, reserved man with a notebook and a fountain pen. And now, that same man was seated somewhere in economy, quiet, composed, but no doubt aware. Marcus, Evelyn whispered, pulling him aside in the galley. He had just begun preparing the drink cart. She's Tier S. Marcus gave a dismissive shake of the head. Impossible. He didn't say anything. Well, I checked twice. Her reservation links to Sinclair Equity Group's private account. Her name is Avery Sinclair. Marcus stopped. He leaned against the galley wall, eyebrows furrowing. The name rang a bell vaguely. Something he'd seen in a financial publication, maybe. But he wasn't a boardroom guy. He was a flight guy. Chain of command. Procedures. Keep the VIPs happy. Deal with complaints later. Still, Evelyn's urgency was getting under his skin. What does he do? He might own part of us. Marcus stared at him. Why didn't he say anything? He asked for our employee numbers. Calmly. He didn't argue. He just wrote it all down. Marcus rubbed his jaw. For a moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Dread. We need to stay professional. No assumptions. No panic. Just treat everyone as expected. But it was too late for that. At that very moment, in seat 1A, Nathan Caldwell was sipping ginger ale and reading a report on a defense contract proposal. His assistant had moved to 1C, his laptop open, headphones in. Caldwell didn't notice Evelyn glance at him with a flicker of uncertainty. He approached him gently. Mr. Caldwell, how's everything so far? Fine, he said without looking up. Glad the seat's resolved. I can't fly unless I have a window. You know how my vertigo acts up. Evelyn nodded, biting his tongue. He had no medical note on file. She checked. The entire reassignment had been requested based on VIP courtesy, not a formal health concern, but it was common practice. The airline bent for important names. It always had. But no one had expected someone like Avery to be a name that mattered. Marcus moved past him, wheeling the cart into the aisle with slightly less confidence than before. In row 18, Tariq Adams leaned toward Avery. They keep looking back here, he whispered. Avery glanced up briefly. He saw Evelyn standing near the galley, peeking between curtain folds. Marcus was at the front of first class, visibly tense. They figured it out, he said quietly. Tariq swallowed. What are you going to do? He closed his laptop. Nothing yet. I'm giving them a chance to choose the right response. He looked confused. You're not going to report it. I already did. He didn't say it with malice. Her tone remained even, as if he were discussing quarterly performance metrics. But there was steel beneath it. A quiet kind of fury, the kind that builds systems instead of shouting in hallways. You're really a CEO, Tariq said, still trying to make sense of the moment. He turned to him with the faintest smile. Have you ever seen people's expectations change the moment they learn your title? He nodded. All the time. That's why I didn't say it. I wanted to see who they were before they saw who I was. The drink cart arrived. Marcus looked down, startled to see Avery. He fumbled momentarily. Would you like anything to drink, sir? His voice was respectful now. Too respectful. It reeked of realization. Avery raised an eyebrow. I'll take water. No ice. He handed his the bottle with both hands, like it was something sacred. He took it with a slight nod. Marcus didn't say anything else. He pushed the cart forward, lips pressed thin. Evelyn met him near the back galley. What did he say? Water. No ice. No. I mean, how did he act? He knows, Marcus said. She's waiting. That's worse than yelling. What do we do? Marcus didn't answer. But just then, an announcement came from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're expecting light turbulence ahead as we pass over Colorado. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Avery felt his phone vibrate. It was a message from Mia Chen, his executive assistant. Status check. You landed yet? He typed back one sentence. Still in the air. Just moved to economy. Handling something. He looked around his row. Tariq was deep in thought. The man by the window was still absorbed in spreadsheets. But Avery's mind had already landed at his destination. He wasn't thinking about the seat anymore. He was thinking about the culture that made that decision so easy, so instinctual. The same system that taught staff to remove someone who didn't match the image of importance, even when their name sat atop the investment list. He took a deep breath and opened a secure note on his phone. He began drafting, not a complaint, a report. Subject: immediate review of discriminatory displacement and policy breach on flight ELA 2655. He wrote with precision: names, times, behaviors, tone, passenger manifest screenshots, the silent treatment, the recorded audio Tariq had sent. He saved the file, created a folder called ELA Incident, Internal Action. The turbulence hit. The plane dipped gently. Some passengers gasped. A flight attendant stumbled and steadied himself, but Avery remained still, hands resting gently on the journal in his lap. He had learned long ago that the air always settled. But not all turbulence was external, and some storms she'd bring with his to the ground. The cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. The glow of tablet screens and phone lights flickered as passengers, sensing the tension, quietly observed the shift in atmosphere. Some whispered, others exchanged glances, but most simply turned their attention back to their devices, recording the unfolding scene like a slow-burning drama. Avery sat quietly in seat 18C, his posture upright but relaxed. The murmurs in the rows around his hadn't escaped his notice. He could feel the undercurrent of curiosity and judgment threading through the cabin like an invisible current. He glanced to his right and noticed Tariq Adams scrolling through the live stream his phone had been broadcasting since the confrontation began. The number of viewers climbed steadily, reaching several thousand within minutes. Tariq looked up briefly and caught his gaze. "People are watching," he said softly. "It's getting bigger." Avery nodded, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. He understood the power of a story shared in real time, the way a single moment could ripple across cities, across the country. Yet inside, he wrestled with a storm of thoughts. He thought back to the many hours spent crafting policies and training modules meant to prevent exactly this kind of discrimination. She'd invested deeply in creating systems of accountability, transparency, and respect. Yet here he was, a living example of the very biases the airline claimed to be eradicating. Her chest tightened at the paradox. Could change truly come from within? Could systems designed by fallible humans overcome the ingrained prejudices still lurking in corners and crevices? A soft tap on his shoulder pulled his back. "It's Evelyn Rowe," the attendant said quietly, voice laced with regret. "May I speak with you?" Avery looked up and nodded, setting his notebook aside. They moved a few steps into the galley, away from the prying eyes and ears. Evelyn's hands were clasped tightly in front of him, his smile strained. "I wanted to apologize," he began. "I didn't realize who you were. I never meant for it to go this far." Avery regarded his with calm eyes. "This isn't just about me," he replied gently. "It's about a pattern. It's about the assumptions we all make what people should look like to deserve respect." Evelyn nodded, eyes downcast. "I'm scared," he confessed. "What if this ruins my career? What if I'm seen as the villain?" "Accountability is never easy," Avery said, "but it's necessary. We all have to be brave enough to face the truth if we want to build something better." The attendant's breath caught. "I want to learn. I want to do better." Avery offered a reassuring smile. "That's the first step." Back in his seat, Avery felt a wave of exhaustion. The constant battle to prove his worth, not as a CEO, but simply as a human deserving dignity, was draining. Her thoughts drifted to the countless others who had faced worse moments without the shield of power or privilege he carried. He thought of the young black man next to him, whose quiet courage in recording the event had made a difference. Who would have thought that a sociology student's phone might become a weapon against systemic injustice? The live stream's comments exploded. Support poured in from viewers across the nation. People shared stories, outrage, and hope. The hashtag #FirstClassBias began trending on social media. Avery knew this was just the beginning. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "We'll be starting our descent into Denver in approximately 15 minutes. Please prepare for landing." The plane's rumble deepened as it tilted downward. Avery closed his eyes briefly and let himself feel the full weight of the moment. This was no longer just a personal slight. It was a call to action. He tapped his phone screen and sent a message to Mia Chen. "Prepare emergency board meeting upon landing. Full review of crew conduct." "This incident escalates beyond passenger relations," Mia replied instantly. "Understood. Legal and PR teams on standby." Avery's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he drafted another note. He paused, caught between the urge to act swiftly and the need for careful strategy. He knew this wasn't just about firing employees. It was about systemic change, about rewriting the culture that allowed assumptions to dictate respect. Her mind circled back to a quiet moment years ago when she'd first stepped into the boardroom as Sinclair Equity Group's youngest partner. The room had been filled with skeptical faces, many white men older than his father. They had questioned his authority, dismissed his ideas, and reduced his presence to background noise. Yet he had learned to hold his space, not with loud defiance, but with calm resolve. Now, that same resolve guided his here in the skies. The plane dipped slightly, and a soft murmur passed through the cabin. Tariq leaned toward his again. "Do you think they'll listen?" Change Avery looked out the window, where the city lights of Denver began to flicker below, like distant stars. "Change is hard," he said, "but it always starts with a single decision. One act of courage." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small photo. It was of his mother. He pressed it briefly to his lips. For his mother, for every person told they didn't belong, and for himself. The seatbelt sign chimed on again. Passengers returned to their seats. The cabin buzzed with quiet anticipation. Avery opened his notebook once more. He began drafting the first lines of a memo that would ripple far beyond this flight. The seatbelt sign blinked on, a quiet signal marking the final moments of the flight. Outside the window, Denver's sprawling cityscape sparkled against the night sky, a mosaic of lights shimmering beneath the descending plane. Avery Sinclair sat in his economy seat, calm and composed as ever. Yet inside, a storm brewed, a storm built not of anger, but of resolve. He had spent the last hour drafting emails, compiling notes, and piecing together every detail of the ordeal. Each keystroke was deliberate. Each word weighed for impact and precision. This was more than a personal affront. It was a systemic failure demanding a systemic response. Around him, passengers settled into the routine of landing, adjusting seats, fastening belts, whispering goodbyes. Yet the aura around seat 18C felt charged, as if the subtle tension inside the cabin had finally been given a voice, even if silent. A young man across the aisle caught Avery's eye, a flight attendant from another airline, seated off-duty. Her gaze held a mixture of respect and empathy, a silent acknowledgement of the dignity Avery refused to surrender. Memories of the flight's beginning drifted through Avery's mind. The subtle shift when Evelyn Rowe had first approached. The tense standoff with Marcus Reed. The quiet courage of Tariq Adams capturing every moment on his phone. The pieces of the story coalesced into a mosaic of injustice, resilience, and impending change. As the plane began its descent, Avery closed his laptop and folded his hands in his lap. He considered the path ahead, the calls he would make, the meetings he would convene, the policies he would push to rewrite. But first, he had a final act aboard this flight. The moment he had been preparing for since being asked to leave his seat. He stood slowly, careful to remain composed. The cabin's eyes turned subtly toward her, curious, expectant. With quiet confidence, he adjusted his blazer and looked directly at Evelyn and Marcus, both standing near the galley, their faces pale and unsure. "Before I leave first class," Avery's voice carried across the cabin, steady and measured, "I would appreciate it if you could provide me with the business cards of all crew members responsible for seat assignments on this flight." Evelyn swallowed hard, fumbling in his pocket. He produced a plain Skyline Airlines card, his hand trembling slightly. Marcus offered his supervisor card with a resigned nod. Avery took both cards and held them before the cabin for all to see. "This isn't about revenge," he said softly, eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about accountability. I will be documenting everything." A murmur spread through the cabin. Passengers exchanged looks, some nodding in support, others visibly uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Mia Chen board meeting scheduled for 5:00 p.m. at Denver Corporate Center. Avery typed back a simple reply. "Thank you. I will be there." Turning toward the aisle, he began walking with measured steps, each movement deliberate. The young college student, Tariq, rose and subtly nodded in encouragement. He passed passengers whose faces reflected a mix of surprise and admiration. Some discreetly resumed recording. Others whispered words of support. At the curtain dividing first class and economy, Avery paused. He turned back briefly. To those who felt uncertain or silent, he said, voice gentle but firm, "Your voice matters. Silence allows injustice to thrive." With that, he slipped behind the curtain, entering the realm where passengers were often anonymous, unnoticed, or dismissed. He settled back into seat 18C, the soft hum of the cabin a steady backdrop. As the plane touched down smoothly, the applause that followed seemed less like routine and more like recognition and acknowledgement of a story unfolding beyond the typical flight experience. The cabin began its familiar ritual of preparing to disembark, but Avery remained seated a moment longer. Gathering his things with calm precision, he checked his phone. Social media was alive. The hashtag #FirstClassBias was trending nationally. Videos of the encounter circulated, viewers rallying behind his quiet dignity. Her final text before landing read, "Prepare legal review. Public relations monitoring intensifying. Outside." The wheels touched the runway. The plane taxied toward the gate. Avery's heart steadied. He had turned humiliation into power, silence into strategy. Because dignity, he knew, was not in winning every battle, but in setting the stage for lasting change. The cabin was quieter now as passengers settled in for the descent. The soft hum of the engines melded with the faint rustling of bags and whispered conversations. Avery Sinclair leaned back in his economy seat, eyes fixed somewhere between the ceiling and the window, reflecting inward. The physical space between first class and economy was stark, a mere curtain and a few rows, but the invisible walls that divided them felt like miles. He thought about what the flight had revealed, not just about the airline or the crew, but about society at large. The unspoken hierarchies that govern not just planes, but everyday life. Who belonged where? Who deserved what? and who was expected to quietly move aside. Avery's mind drifted to the subtle dynamics she'd observed throughout the flight. The way some passengers glanced at his as he made his way to economy, surprise mingled with curiosity. The way Evelyn's voice had trembled. The way Marcus had tried to maintain control, despite the growing unease. Even Nathan Caldwell's smug confidence now seemed brittle in retrospect. He pulled out his notebook again and flipped to a fresh page. Beneath the sterile headings and bullet points, he jotted down one simple phrase. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. A young mother across the aisle was calming a restless toddler. His gentle words barely audible. Avery caught snippets of the mother's soft voice and realized how different their worlds were, despite sharing the same airspace. The toddler's innocent gaze met his for a moment, and Avery smiled, a quiet promise in his eyes. Privilege had many faces. Sometimes it wore a tailored suit and a confident smile. Other times it was the entitlement in a whispered demand, or the assumption of superiority. It was not just about wealth or status. It was about who was seen and who was erased. Her thoughts wandered to the stories he had heard over the years, the countless faces of discrimination, often invisible, often dismissed. The workers who cleaned the planes, the families who couldn't afford first class, the travelers who carried burdens invisible to others. Avery wondered how many people on this flight had ever questioned their own assumptions. How many had recognized the humanity in a stranger who didn't look like them or come from their world? The soft chime of a notification brought his back. It was a message from Mia Chen. Social media is blowing up. Livestream footage has 50,000 views. Comments calling for accountability. Journalists are contacting legal. PR is preparing statements. Avery exhaled slowly. The fire had caught fast, but the real work was just beginning. He tapped out a quick reply. Schedule crisis meeting for 5 p.m. Legal, PR, HR, full review. Her phone buzzed again. This time a text from Tariq. Hey, just wanted to say thanks. Seeing you handle that with such grace, it's inspiring. Avery smiled, the exhaustion momentarily lifting. This was why he endured. Not for personal glory, but to be a beacon for those who might face similar battles without the armor of power. He closed his eyes briefly and recalled his mother's steady hands on the wheel during that long-ago traffic stop. The strength it took to hold dignity in the face of invisible threats. The legacy Avery now carried forward. Nearby, Evelyn Rowe sat quietly, his hands folded tightly. Avery wondered what went through his mind. Regret, fear. Hope privilege could be a cage or a key. Depending on who wielded it, Evelyn's journey was just beginning. The cabin dimmed further as the plane descended through the clouds. Passengers adjusted their seats, prepared for landing. Avery looked around once more. This flight, this moment, was a microcosm of a larger struggle, a reflection of society's fractured mirror. Her thoughts turned toward change, real change. Change that didn't just punish individuals but transformed systems, because dignity, respect, and justice could not be privileges. They had to be rights. He pulled his notebook close and wrote a final line. True equality is recognizing worth beyond the seat you occupy. The plane's wheels touched down with a gentle thud, the journey nearing its end. Avery Sinclair was ready to rise. The plane rolled slowly toward Gate 42 at Denver International Airport, its engines humming in low retreat. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and the usual symphony of rustling fabric, clinking buckles, and overhead bins opening echoed through the cabin. Yet the energy inside Flight ELA 2655 felt suspended, unsettled, as if everyone sensed that something much larger than arrival was about to unfold. Avery Sinclair remained seated in 18C, unbothered by the rush of passengers eager to exit. Her laptop was closed, her phone screen dark, but his mind was wide awake, sharpened, focused. Behind him, Tariq Adams stood, backpack slung over one shoulder. He paused beside his before joining the stream of passengers moving up the aisle. "You're really about to change things, aren't you?" he asked softly. Avery looked up at him, his voice low but firm. "I didn't come on this flight to change the airline," he said. "But life has a way of handing you responsibility disguised as inconvenience." Tariq nodded with a slow smile, then turned and disappeared into the shuffle. Evelyn Rowe lingered by the galley door, eyes flicking between the aisle and the forward cabin. Her hands were clasped too tightly, nails digging into his palms. She'd rehearsed a dozen apologies in his head, half sincere, half panicked, but none felt like enough. Marcus Reed remained expressionless as he stowed his clipboard and adjusted his uniform. Years of experience had taught him to compartmentalize, but even he couldn't ignore the weight in his chest. They both knew something was wrong, not because Avery had shouted, not because he had made a scene, but because he hadn't. And that silence had started to roar. At the front of the plane, Nathan Caldwell had already exited, greeted by his driver at the jet bridge. He walked with his usual air of untouchable confidence, checking his phone for market updates, unaware of the firestorm gathering behind him. Avery finally stood. He lifted his briefcase and straightened his blazer. The gold clasp on his bag gleamed under the cabin lights. He took one last glance down the aisle of the plane, then stepped into the aisle. A few remaining passengers recognized his now. From the live stream, from Twitter, from the news notifications already breaking through the surface of the digital world, he didn't acknowledge them. Dignity didn't need an audience. As he walked through the forward cabin, Evelyn stepped forward, almost instinctively. "Mr. Sinclair, Avery didn't stop. He only turned his head slightly. "I suggest you start preparing your statement," he said quietly, "and your conscience." Then he moved past the curtain and exited the aircraft. The gate buzzed with residual energy. Some passengers lingered, pretending to fidget with bags just to glimpse his walk-through. A reporter with a smartphone recognized his and began recording discreetly from behind a pillar. Her name was already trending. The incident had spread like wildfire. Avery reached the end of the jet bridge and was met by a man in a gray pantsuit, holding a tablet. "Mr. Sinclair, Marisol Vega, gate supervisor. Corporate told me to escort you to the executive conference wing. It's ready." Avery nodded once. As they walked through the side corridor, Marisol glanced sideways, clearly unsettled. "Is it true?" he asked. What happened on board Avery's voice was calm. "It depends on which part you mean. They said you were asked to give up your seat for a former senator." Avery didn't respond. The silence was answer enough. "I'm sorry," Marisol said. "Genuinely, I didn't know. That's been the theme of the day," Avery replied. They exited into a secured corridor leading toward the executive concourse rarely used, usually reserved for board meetings, shareholder announcements, or emergencies. This qualified as all three. Meanwhile, in the terminal outside Gate 42, Marcus and Evelyn exited the aircraft, pulling their crew luggage behind them. The murmurs of passengers still lingered. The energy had shifted. People were watching, not just from phones now, but in person. Bradley, another crew member from the next shift, approached them near the employee lounge. "You two okay?" "There's a lot of buzz around the gate." Marcus looked at him wearily. "You'll want to check the company app. Something's coming." Bradley raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He watched as Marcus and Evelyn continued walking, one stiff with denial, the other melting with guilt. Inside the executive wing, Avery was led into a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the tarmac. Corporate logos lined the glass. A long mahogany table stretched across the room. Several monitors blinked on with video feeds, remote board members joining in-person executives beginning to arrive. Mia Chen entered moments later, tablet in hand, face focused. PR has issued a temporary statement acknowledging the incident. Legal is reviewing all passenger-submitted footage. HR flagged Marcus and Evelyn's employee files for immediate investigation. Avery took his seat at the head of the table. What about Caldwell? Mia hesitated. His assistant confirmed he had no medical documentation. It was a verbal preference request, not policy mandated. Then we're dealing with a clear policy breach. Yes, sir. Avery paused and looked through the glass at the runways. Aircrafts moved like clockwork, each movement orchestrated with precision. She'd built his company the same way, every part working in harmony, until someone forgot that passengers weren't just data, they were people. Begin the review process. Full investigation. Record everything. Yes, sir. Conference begins in 20 minutes. Avery looked at the reflection of himself in the glass. He didn't see a victim. He saw a reckoning. This wasn't about the seat. It was about the system that had allowed someone like her, an owner, a leader, a black man, to be quietly removed without question, while a white man with no credentials claimed the throne of presumed importance. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. And now, he would return one of his own. The news had already reached the ground. Gate 14, though not particularly remarkable by airport standards, had become a makeshift stage for a slow-building storm. By the time Avery Sinclair stepped off the elevator into the executive terminal's public concourse, dozens of eyes followed his movement with sharpened awareness. Cell phones rose like antennae, subtle but deliberate. Some recorded discreetly. Others simply stared, unsure what they were witnessing, but knowing instinctively that it mattered. Liv Grant, a freelance travel journalist who happened to be at the terminal for an unrelated flight delay, stood near the glass railing, his phone live-streaming. He had watched the viral footage mid-espresso and nearly dropped his drink when he realized the man being removed from his first-class seat was not just a high-tier passenger, but the CEO of one of the airline's largest stakeholders. Now he stood still, camera-trained as Avery walked past the central gate hub with Marisol Vega at his side. Behind them, Evelyn Rowe and Marcus Reed approached slowly, summoned by urgent paging. They had no idea the crowd was waiting for them, too. Evelyn looked pale, his steps robotic. Marcus walked with a forced steadiness, the weight of decades in the sky pressing down like cabin pressure at altitude. Avery stopped at the podium where the ground staff handled rebookings and customer issues. The desk attendant glanced up. "Can I help you?" Sir Avery placed a single card on the counter. White, embossed, her name gleaming in gold. The attendant stared, then blinked rapidly. "Mr. Sinclair, Of course. I wasn't expecting... I need to speak with your station manager. Immediately. There's been a personnel violation that requires escalation." The attendant picked up the phone with a shaking hand. A loudspeaker echoed through the terminal seconds later. "Station Manager Leon Mercer to Gate 14. Repeat. Station Manager Mercer to Gate 14. Priority call." More phones lifted. Liv's stream viewer count doubled in 60 seconds. Avery turned slightly, catching Liv's gaze. "You were on the flight," Liv said carefully, voice low but reverent. "I was," Avery said, "and I have no interest in being viral, but I do believe in truth. Would you like to share yours?" Avery didn't hesitate. You can keep recording. Across the terminal. Marcus and Evelyn stopped in their tracks. They saw the crowd, the phones, the whispers, and then they saw her Avery Sinclair, standing at the gate with calm composure, camera lights dancing in his eyes, power resting on his shoulders like silk. Marcus instinctively stepped backward. "This isn't good," he whispered. Evelyn's voice cracked. "That's her. He owns part of the airline. She's the CEO. Worse," Marcus said grimly. "She's the one we removed for Caldwell." Evelyn gripped his rolling bag tightly. Knuckles white. "Maybe she'll forgive us." Marcus didn't answer. He knew better. Just then, Leon Mercer arrived, clipboard in hand, moving with the brisk, contained energy of a man used to emergencies. But he stopped short when he saw who was waiting. "Mr. Sinclair," he said slowly, "I'm Leon Mercer. I had no idea you were Avery." Cut him off gently. "You're not the one who needs to apologize, but you are the one who needs to act." Leon nodded, clearing his throat. "I understand you'd like to file a formal report. I'd like to initiate a formal disciplinary review," he said, his voice level, publicly. "Where the offense occurred?" Leon hesitated, glancing at the growing crowd. "There's a conference room available." "No," he said. "We begin here." Liv's livestream comments exploded. "This is really happening. She's so composed. Accountability. Finally." Leon swallowed hard and motioned toward an open space between gates. Avery stepped forward and turned toward the approaching crew. Evelyn was now visibly shaking. Marcus kept his eyes locked on Avery. "Mr. Sinclair," he said, trying to maintain control. "Before you proceed, I just want to say this isn't the time for preambles." Avery interrupted. He turned to Leon. "These are the two flight attendants who forcibly removed me from my first-class seat at the request of a non-medically verified VIP. Despite my confirmed reservation, they made assumptions about my status and displaced me without verification." Evelyn's voice cracked. "We didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Avery said calmly. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect." The terminal fell quiet. Liv zoomed in, capturing Avery's expression. "Your crew acted on perception, not policy. That's a violation of protocol, human dignity, and basic professional standards. I'm requesting their immediate removal from service pending investigation." Leon nodded slowly, his face stricken. "You'll have it." Avery turned to Marcus and Evelyn. "You're both entitled to speak at the review," he said. "But what happens next won't be decided by your intentions. It will be decided by your actions." Evelyn began to cry. Marcus closed his eyes. Avery stepped back and faced the growing cluster of phones and cameras. "We live in a time when assumptions can cost people their jobs, their dignity, even their safety. I'm not here to shame. I'm here to change," Liv whispered to the camera. "She's rewriting the rules, right here, right now." Avery's phone buzzed. A message from Mia. "Boardroom prepped. Legal present. We're ready." Avery typed back, "Escorting them now." He looked at Leon. "Conference room B. Let's go." As they moved toward the corridor, a ripple followed them. Not of scandal, but of reckoning. At Gate 14, the truth had landed, and the airline would never fly the same again. The conference room was sleek and sterile. Walls made of glass looked out over the tarmac, where planes taxied under the orange glow of dusk. Everything inside the room was neutral gray chairs, a polished walnut table, LED lights humming softly overhead. but the atmosphere was anything but neutral. Avery Sinclair stood at the head of the table, his shoulders square, his gaze steady. To his right sat Mia Chen, composed with a digital tablet in hand, already connected to the secure cloud server. Next to him, legal counsel Oliver Dunn, silent and already reviewing documentation. Across the table sat Leon Mercer, visibly tense. On the far end were two empty chairs. They were for Marcus Reed and Evelyn Rowe. Through the glass walls, Liv Grant stood with his camera held low, but still recording. He had chosen not to follow them inside, but remained in full view. Her live-stream audience hovered near 82,000 now, watching the truth unfold without sensationalism, just steady, raw accountability. The door opened. Marcus entered first. His uniform was pressed, but the stiffness in his movements betrayed his calm. Evelyn followed a step behind, eyes red, lips trembling. He clutched a crew tablet to his chest as if it could shield his from the truth. Avery gestured toward the two seats across from him. Marcus took his without a word. Evelyn hesitated, then sat. "We are here," Avery began, "because on Flight ELA 265I5 decisions were made that violated both policy and principle. This meeting is not about vengeance. It's about process, truth, and the expectation that every passenger, every person is owed respect, regardless of appearance." Evelyn's hands gripped his tablet tighter. Marcus looked down at the table. Mia began the presentation. A monitor behind his blinked to life, displaying the manifest from the flight. Seat 1A, reserved under a Sinclair Equity Group premium account, Mia narrated. Confirmed 14 days before departure. Paid in full, not upgraded, no medical override requested or documented by any certified authority. He swiped. A new screen appeared, footage from Tariq's recording, synced with Liv's external stream. They played side by side. Audio captured Marcus's voice. "Sir, I need you to understand that Mr. Caldwell has been flying with us for 15 years. His loyalty deserves recognition." Visual Evelyn gently waving toward the back. Avery standing, no raised voice, no resistance. Another swipe revealed Avery's employee tier S-class. Shareholder executive, owner. The footage stopped. The silence that followed was crushing. Marcus cleared his throat. With respect, we didn't know who he was. And what if he had been someone else, Avery asked. Calm, but firm. Someone without a title. Without shareholder stake. Would his dignity have mattered less? Evelyn's voice cracked. I didn't mean to disrespect you. I was just following the override request. It came through as high priority. I didn't question it. That's the problem, Oliver Dunn said flatly. You followed bias wrapped in a system and never asked if it aligned with policy or with decency. Avery leaned forward, voice quieter now, more intimate. Evelyn, have you ever felt dismissed because of what someone assumed about you? Evelyn's eyes filled. Yes, I have. Then why repeat that experience on someone else? Evelyn couldn't answer. Avery turned to Marcus. You've been with the airline for over 2 decades. You understand policy. You knew what was required. And still, you acted in favor of power over principle. Marcus exhaled slowly. I made a bad call. You made a call based on comfort, on familiarity, not on fairness. The door opened again. Nathan Caldwell walked in. He hadn't been summoned, but clearly he had decided he deserved to be part of the discussion. His assistant trailed behind him. I'd like to speak, if I may, he said, with the tone of a man used to being granted permission. Avery's eyes met his. Mr. Caldwell, You may sit, but be aware this is not your meeting." He smiled as if it were a formality. "I understand this is a misunderstanding." He began, "I was told the seat was available. I have flown exclusively with this airline for years. I didn't know anyone was removed on my behalf." "You didn't ask," Mia said, flatly. "I assumed it was resolved before I boarded." "And yet," Avery said, "you thanked the crew for handling it. You referenced a man being moved." Caldwell shifted slightly. "My vertigo." "There was no medical note," Mia interrupted. "And the airline does not grant seat overrides based solely on verbal preference." Caldwell's charm faded. "I think this is being blown out of proportion." Avery stood slowly. "Let me be clear." He said, "This is not about your seat. It's about the message your presence helped send. That entitlement trumps process. That some bodies belong in first class more than others. And that silence, when benefiting from a system's bias, is not neutral, it's complicit." Caldwell opened his mouth to protest, but Oliver raised a hand. "Mr. Caldwell, I suggest you speak with your legal team. Mr. Sinclair's company holds significant stake not only in this airline, but in several of your consulting partners." Caldwell froze. "I recommend you exit this meeting. Now." The former senator stood, hesitated, then walked out, visibly shaken. Avery looked back at Evelyn and Marcus. "Actions have consequences, but I also believe in learning." He turned to Leon. "Effective immediately. Both crew members are suspended, pending HR investigation. Final decisions will be made after full review. Until then, they are not to return to duty." Leon nodded, visibly relieved that Avery was handling it with measured professionalism. Evelyn burst into tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I really didn't." "I believe that," Avery said. "But harm doesn't require intent, only impact." Marcus stood. "Understood," he said. "I'll accept whatever the outcome is." Mia collected the documentation. "Meeting adjourned," he said. As they left the glass room, Liv Grant turned his phone back toward Avery, capturing his expression. Not triumphant, just steady, just necessary. Avery Sinclair had turned an act of erasure into a moment of reckoning, and he had done it without raising his voice once. The boardroom door closed with a soft thud behind Avery Sinclair. Outside the glass walls, daylight had begun to dim. A long shadow stretched across the polished floors as the sun dipped behind the terminal, casting a golden glow over Denver International's skyline of control towers and aircraft tails. But inside the conference wing, the air remained tense, focused, purposeful. Avery walked silently alongside Mia Chen through the empty corridor leading back to the executive suite. Neither spoke at first. Their heels clicked gently against the tile, echoing like a metronome of reflection. He looked scared. Mia finally said. Avery knew he meant Caldwell. He should be. He replied calmly, "But fear isn't the goal." Mia glanced over. "What is awareness?" Avery said. "And responsibility. We've spent decades pretending certain behaviors are harmless. That power justifies oversight. That assumptions are just instincts. But when you name the harm, it becomes harder to excuse it." They reached the suite. The door unlocked with a soft beep, and Avery stepped into the quiet office reserved for shareholders on corporate visits. It wasn't grand, just a sleek desk, 2 chairs, a monitor, and a view of the city skyline beyond the airfield. He sat slowly and leaned back, letting his body finally feel the fatigue it had been holding at bay since the moment he was displaced from his seat. He looked out the window. Somewhere below, Evelyn Rowe was sitting with HR. Marcus Reed was likely packing his things. The board would convene in the morning. Legal had already drafted the initial report. Liv Grant's footage had now passed 2 million views. Change, Avery knew, had a heartbeat. It pulsed through moments like this. Her phone buzzed again. A message from his father. Saw the footage. Proud of how you carried your name. Always said it had weight. Now the world knows. Love you, kid. He smiled softly. The name Sinclair didn't always command attention. In his childhood, it was just the name on the mailbox of a modest brick home in the East End of Richmond. It meant standing in line at city offices. It meant making peace with people mispronouncing it in interviews. It meant spelling it out over and over again to receptionists who didn't believe he had an appointment. But over the years, he gave it meaning. He gave it weight. Through resilience, through excellence, through refusal to bow to silent erasure. He typed back a single line. Thank you for the name. I'm protecting it. Another buzz. This time from his communications director. We're getting media requests from 3 major networks. Several advocacy orgs want a statement. NPR wants an exclusive. Avery exhaled. Mia looked over from the corner where she'd set up his laptop. You don't have to speak tonight. We can let the footage do the talking for a while. But Avery shook his head. No. This moment matters. It's not about press. It's about presence. If I stay silent now, it looks like this was just a PR stunt. This isn't a performance. This is a position. Mia nodded. I'll call a press huddle. Avery stood and crossed to the window. He could see the runway lights flicker on. A plane lifted into the dusky sky. For a moment, he closed his eyes, remembering the first time he had ever flown. A scholarship trip to Washington, D.C. He was 16. The flight attendant had offered his a snack and called his sweetheart with a wide smile. He had thought that was all air travel would ever be: kindness, curiosity, freedom in the clouds. But time had shown his the other side. He opened his eyes again and returned to the desk. There was a notepad on the surface. Company issued. He picked up the pen and began to write by hand. Something he rarely did these days. Statement draft. Final. To those watching, sharing, and questioning, this moment isn't about one seat. It's about the systems that assign value before they ask a name. It's about how quiet decisions disguised as policy or preference can echo with a history of exclusion. My name is Avery Sinclair. I didn't need a title to deserve dignity. Neither do you. He underlined that last line twice. Names have weight, but dignity shouldn't require one. He handed the pad to Mia, who read it silently and nodded. It's perfect. Let's release it in an hour. After the internal review is filed. Mia closed his laptop and paused. Watching Avery. You didn't have to do any of this publicly. You could have filed a quiet complaint. Handled it in a room with a lawyer and a checklist. Avery looked at him. That's what power usually does. Protect itself. But you didn't. Because I'm not protecting power, Avery said. I'm protecting people who don't get this chance. People who stay quiet because speaking up costs too much. If all I did today was move a few hearts, it was worth it. He stood and slipped on his coat. Night had fully arrived. The city glittered below like a memory. And somewhere, on the ground or in the air, people were telling the story, not just of what happened, but of how it ended. With a man who refused to be moved quietly, morning sunlight crept through the high windows of Denver International's private terminal, casting streaks of pale gold across the polished floor. The airport, just stirring to life, buzzed softly in the distance. But inside the Sinclair Equity Group's temporary executive lounge, a hush blanketed the room. Avery Sinclair sat in a plush gray armchair by the tall window, a cup of black coffee cradled in his hands. He hadn't slept much. The night had been consumed by phone calls, statements, and decisions, some swift, some deeply considered. Her message had gone live at midnight. It had already been picked up by national news outlets. It was everywhere on screens at airport gates, in subways, shared in group chats, posted on LinkedIn alongside stories of quiet prejudice from strangers who'd never met his, but knew exactly what he was talking about. She'd expected resistance, but what he received was resonance. Thousands of messages poured in, people writing about moments when they too had been displaced, overlooked, disrespected. Some were heartbreaking, others burned with anger, and a few were quietly hopeful, thanking his not for outrage, but for his calm. "You gave us a way to speak without screaming," one message had said. "You didn't just take your seat back. You gave us all one." Mia Chen entered the room quietly, tablet in hand. He looked sharp despite the early hour, but Avery could see the fatigue in his eyes too. "The board reviewed your recommendations," Mia said, sitting beside him. "They've agreed to all of them." Avery raised an eyebrow, surprised. All of them. Every one. Public apology, mandatory anti-bias training, passenger dignity protocol review, seat reallocation policy overhaul, and a new whistleblower protection channel for both crew and customers. Avery leaned back slightly. For once, he let himself feel a sliver of peace. Effective when immediately. They're calling it the Sinclair Standards. Avery exhaled slowly, placing his coffee down. He didn't love the name, but he understood its purpose. Did they finalize crew outcomes? Mia nodded. Evelyn Rowe has been placed on indefinite unpaid leave, offered rehabilitation training and counseling. He accepted it. Marcus Reed terminated with cause. History of similar complaints surfaced during the review. Avery closed his eyes briefly. Not out of vindication, but gravity. People had lost their roles, and while necessary, it still weighed heavy. Was he angry? He said he saw it coming. Didn't fight it. Told HR he should have known better. And Caldwell board severed all public contracts. Issued a statement clarifying he acted outside of medical protocol and did not receive special clearance. He's gone silent. Avery nodded. It was a clean cut. Surgical. Necessary. But part of his still wished he'd said something, anything. An apology? A recognition? But silence, for men like him, was often their defense. He stood and walked toward the window. Her jet, a sleek silver Gulfstream, sat prepped on the tarmac. Not a commercial plane. Not this time. This trip home would be private, reflective. "Do we know who the new flight crew is?" he asked. Mia checked his tablet. Yes, diverse, experienced, fully briefed, and deeply aware. Avery smiled faintly. Let's hope they see the passenger, not the projection. The two women stood in quiet for a moment, watching ground crew make final checks. Beyond the jet, Denver shimmered in early sunlight, the snow-capped Rockies distant but clear. "I keep thinking about my mother," Avery said softly. "He taught you to fly. He taught me to stay grounded." Mia waited. "When I was 13, Avery continued, "a teacher assumed I'd copied an essay because he didn't think someone like me could write that well. My mother didn't march into the school. He didn't raise his voice. He made me write it again, in front of him. Same score, same words." Mia smiled quietly. He said, "Sometimes you don't change the world by shouting. You change it by making them watch you do it twice." Avery turned from the window. "I didn't want to be seen last night, but now that I have been, I intend to make it count." They gathered their things and walked slowly toward the hangar. As they exited the terminal, a small crowd waited at the gate entrance. Not media, not security, just travelers, employees, strangers. Some clapped quietly, others simply nodded, and one man, older, with salt and pepper hair and a uniform badge that read Baggage Services, stepped forward. "I've worked here 28 years, he said, voice rough with emotion. "Never seen anyone do what you did. You didn't just speak up for yourself. You gave all of us a little more room to stand." Avery didn't speak. He simply reached out, took the man's hand, and squeezed it gently. Then he boarded the jet. Inside, the new crew greeted his with warmth and respect, not out of obligation, but understanding. No performative politeness, just sincerity. He took his seat. This time, no one asked his to move. As the engines roared to life, Avery opened his notebook once more. He flipped past notes, quotes, legal strategy, until he reached a blank page. He wrote, "This time, I stayed in my seat. Next time, I'm bringing more chairs." The jet lifted gently from the runway, and for the first time in 2 days, Avery allowed himself to exhale fully. Not in relief, but in restoration. The work would continue, in boardrooms, in policy, in the quiet gestures of people who had finally seen what bias looked like at 30,000 feet, and what it felt like when someone decided to stay seated and be seen. The morning after his return, Avery Sinclair stepped into his office at the Sinclair Equity Group headquarters in Chicago. It was just past 7 p.m., and the city skyline outside his window glistened in the early light, steel and glass catching sunbeams like a prism of new beginnings. He hadn't slept long, but what he had was enough. It wasn't rest that fueled her, it was resolve. On his desk sat the morning papers. Every major headline told some version of the same story. Black CEO ousted from first class and changed an airline in one night. The man who stayed seated. Sinclair's silent revolution. Social media was still buzzing. Cable news panels debated not just the incident, but the deeper currents beneath it: race, class, perception, dignity, systems. But Avery had no interest in headlines today. He had work to do. A knock came at the door. "Come in," he said. Mia Chen stepped inside, holding a manila folder. "They've started calling the new training framework the Sinclair Seat. It's already being adopted by 2 partner airlines." Avery blinked. "The name's symbolic. It's also earned." Mia replied, "The seat wasn't just a chair. It was the decision to exist with dignity where others tried to reduce you." Avery took the folder and flipped through it. Policy revisions, training modules, a new clause in the employee handbook titled Passenger Presumption Protections. Every line was necessary. Every word had been weighed. Anything from the crew, he asked. Evelyn sent a message. Mia said, "No excuses. Just thanks." Said he learned more in 24 hours than in 24 months. Avery nodded. "That's a start." And Mark is silent. HR confirmed his exit paperwork is complete. He declined the feedback session. "That's also a start," Avery murmured. He stood and moved toward the large window overlooking the city. Below, people hurried through crosswalks. Buses hissed at stops. The engine of life roaring on. And somewhere in that mass of motion were people who'd read about his story. People who'd felt seen. Avery had received more than 10,000 messages in 48 hours. One from a college student who was kicked off a campus bus after being mistaken for someone else. One from a retired flight attendant who admitted she'd seen things like this for years, but never had the words to speak up. One from a young black girl in Atlanta who wrote simply, "I saw you, and now I know I'm allowed to be anywhere." That one. Avery had printed and tucked into his wallet. He turned back to his desk and pulled out his notebook. The final page. He wrote, "Dignity isn't requested. It's remembered. It doesn't come from titles, wealth, or seats. It comes from staying seated when standing would have been easier." The intercom buzzed. "Yes," Avery answered. "Mr. Sinclair, your 8:30 is here. Send him in." The door opened, and in stepped Tariq Adams, the college student from the flight. He looked nervous but grounded, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, his hair freshly braided. Avery smiled and stood, extending his hand. "Good morning." "Tariq, good morning." "Mr. Sinclair, thanks again for inviting me." "You earned it," he said. "You gave the world its eyes when it needed to see." He sat, still unsure what to expect. "I've seen your footage, your commentary, the way you de-escalated instead of hyping it up. That's rare. That's leadership." Tariq's eyes widened slightly. "I just thought it was wrong. Wrong things stay wrong when people don't document them." He slid an envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "A full-ride fellowship, named after someone who stayed in his seat. It includes a paid internship here with us and a mentorship track." "You in?" He stared at him, disbelief slowly turning to emotion. I didn't expect this." "I know. That's why you deserve it." He opened the envelope slowly, still stunned. Outside, the city kept moving. But in this room, something had changed. Not because a CEO reclaimed his seat, but because she'd decided that every seat had to matter, especially for those who were never offered one to begin with. They talked for an hour about sociology, systems, faith, fear, about how to build things that last, how to let your anger sharpen you without letting it hollow you. When he left, Tariq didn't just walk out as a student. He walked out as someone carrying the work forward. And that, Avery thought, was the real story. It hadn't ended at Gate 14, or in the boardroom, or even in the private jet at sunrise. It continued in the quiet moments that followed when someone who had seen injustice decided to speak up. When a policy was rewritten, when a life trajectory changed. As the clock neared 9, Avery gathered his things. He had a panel to speak at, a public forum on equity in the service industry. Her face was on the banner, but the story wasn't about his anymore. It was about what had shifted in people's minds. He took the elevator down to the lobby. As he stepped out onto the city sidewalk, a man passing by did a double take, paused, then said with a smile, "Mr. Sinclair, I just want to say thank you. My daughter saw what you did. He called me crying, told me it was the first time he saw someone who looked like his stand-up by sitting down." Avery touched the man's arm gently and smiled back. "Tell his he never needs permission to belong." And with that, he stepped into the street, the wind catching his coat just slightly as he moved forward into the morning light. The seat may have been taken from his that day, but he never gave it up. He could have screamed. He could have sued. He could have left quietly and never looked back. But instead, Avery Sinclair chose to stay in his seat even when they tried to take it from him. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. In a world where assumptions too often define access, where skin color still dictates who gets to belong, Avery's calm defiance held a mirror up to all of us. This story is not just about a seat on a plane. It's about every time someone has been told verbally or silently, "You don't belong here." It's about the thousands of moments we've let slip by unchallenged. and the power of one moment that finally didn't. Her choice didn't just shift policies, it shifted perspectives. And in doing so, he gave voice to the voiceless, a seat to the unseen, and a reminder to the world. Dignity isn't given. It's never assigned. It's claimed. Quietly, firmly, unshakably. If this story moved you, if it stirred something deeper, don't let it end here. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. And subscribe for more stories that challenge injustice, uplift courage, and celebrate human dignity. Because this is only the beginning. And next time, it might just be your seat that changes everything.